Good afternoon. I hope research team, we are good to start.
Yes, we are good to start.
So good afternoon to all those who are joining us today for this series, the start of this series on crop health, crop protection products toxicology. We are moving from the word pesticide and management of poisoning cases. We are lucky to have a team supported by the crop science, Bayer Crop Science, who will be taking us through this module. We hope you'll join us for all the 4 sessions that we have set that will be happening every Tuesday. So without much further ado, I wish to first invite one of our main guests and partners for this program, that is Jennifer Anakis. She's the head of global product production at the Bayer Crop Science, St. Louis. And Jen started with Bayer Monsanto in 1999, and she has more than 25 years experience in multiple areas in the agricultural industry, including transgenic crops as well as agricultural chemistry. The product stewardship team establishes stewardship policies and partners internally and externally so that they can be able to drive responsible development and launch and use of mainly the Bayer products worldwide. Jen, who is joining us today, has a Master of Science in Biological Sciences from South Illinois University in Edwardsville and a Master's of Business Administration from Webster University. And we are happy that you can join us and partner with us in this very important, we cut it as a One Health approach to managing pesticide management of poisoning and also responsible use of crop protection products. So thank you. Jennifer, if you can give us a few opening remarks.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Dorothy, for your introduction. And thank you to the Kenyatta National Hospital for partnering with Bayer to provide these upcoming seminars. As Dr. Dorothy said, my name is Jennifer Ernicus, and I work at Bayer Crop Science in St. Louis, Missouri, in the U.S. As she said, I currently lead our global product stewardship program. So we work within the company and outside as well. And we work across the entire life cycle. So from the point of invention all the way through discontinuation. One of the things that I'm really proud of to work at Bayer are programs like this and our very deep and strong commitment to our responsible and safe use of our products. This program in particular, focusing on the prevention of unintended exposure, and if an unintended exposure does happen, how to manage that is of utmost importance. And I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about our Safe Use Ambassador program that's been in place since 2017. We have partnerships with over 50 universities in 13 countries. And this is a fantastic program where agricultural students go and work within their agriculture communities. So it's a very important and impactful work with that Safe Use Ambassador program. I just want to thank everybody. I know you all have a very busy schedule, so I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in this and similar programs. And again, many thanks to our facilitators and our speakers. And I wish you a great session. So with that, I'll hand it back to Dr. Dorothy.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Now, without much further ado, I'd want to introduce our main presenter, Dr. Sarah Eliza Lockwood. She's an emergency medicine physician and medical toxicologist with a long-standing interest in global health. After she completed her toxicology fellowship at NYU in 2006, Dr. Lockwood returned to the Washington University in St. Louis to start an ACGME accredited fellowship in medical toxicology. She has over 10 years experience involved in global health and humanitarian relief projects. She has organized relief missions to Haiti after the 2010 earthquake and started a scholar track on global health for the Washington University Division of Emergency Medicine and is one of the global health scholars for the Department of Internal Medicine. Over the years, Dr. Lockwood began to realize that in order to have sustainable impact in global health, she needed to find creative ways of addressing malnutrition and insect-borne illnesses, two most commonly encountered public health problems in developing countries. With that in mind, Dr. Lockwood started working with the medical affairs lead for Bayer, a global seed and chemical company with innovative technology that has a great potential to remediate malnutrition. So welcome, Dr. Lockwood. Give you the platform to continue to update us on the field of medical toxicology. Karibu.
Thank you, Asante, for that welcome. Jambo, karibu, I think that's how you say it in Swahili. I'm very, very delighted to be speaking to you about this topic that is near and dear to my heart. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and so this is a part of a series of talks that we're going to be doing every Tuesday at this time for the next 4 weeks. And today's talk is really going to be covering a One Health perspective on how there is an intersection between agriculture and medicine that most people really aren't aware of. So we're going to go over some pretty interesting history and then basically touch on a few things about crop protection products, and then we'll get into much more technical detail over the following weeks. But please feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to go to the next slide. Just a second. There we go. I'm going to minimize this. Okay, so the Safe Use Ambassador program that we run from Bayer is really recognizing that there are a vast number of farmers around the world that are using safe crop protection products. And if they're used in a way that's not proper, you can wind up having negative effects on health. And so what we are trying to do is facilitate the efficacious and safe use of these products by helping rural practitioners and medical students learn and play an important role in helping farmers apply these things in a safe manner. We cooperate with multiple agricultural students and medical students since 2022, and we really think this is an exciting program that really focuses on our idea that health should be up for all and hunger for none. So we're going to help medical students across the globe participate in the Safe Use Ambassadors program. And we're going to create partnerships with medical practitioners, especially those serving in rural areas, which tend to be underserved in general. So now let's just get to the start of the whole thing. So I'm Liza Lockwood. I'm the Medical Affairs Lead and Senior Science Fellow for the Crop Science Division at Bayer. And lots of people say, what is an emergency physician doing in an agricultural setting? And so really agriculture is a little bit in a state of an emergency right now. I like to sort of refer to it this way. The reason why I am here is because of this baby. And this baby is also the reason why I went to medical school. So when I was 21 years old, a long, long time ago in this picture, I was working backstage at a concert venue and going to college, and I was a theater major. And my father, who was a physician, asked me if I wanted to go to Haiti on a medical mission where he would be taking care of patients, medical patients, and we would be working in an orphanage, changing diapers, feeding babies, and those kinds of things. I met Fritz and I fell in love with Fritz, and he changed my life's trajectory. Because of Fritz, I decided to go to medical school. And after medical school, I wanted to get involved in emergency medicine. Actually, medical school, while I was there, I was involved in an intense tropical medicine course and got to spend 6 weeks at Coast General Hospital in Mombasa, delivering babies under supervision of a Kenyan and Belgian obstetricians. And I was asking them, because I thought I wanted to do obstetrics, and I was asking them what would they advise, and their advice to me was to go into emergency medicine, because if I became an obstetrician in the West, it would be very hard for me to leave my patient base and go do relief work and humanitarian work in places like Kenya. So I did emergency medicine, and I felt like a jack of all trades, but a master of none. So I went ahead and did a fellowship in medical toxicology at NYU, and then returned back to St. Louis and at Washington University and became a faculty member and ran the toxicology program for several years. And then in January of 2010, the earthquake hit Haiti. And so I organized a relief mission to Haiti and found it in a similar situation as I had 21 years before. And what was I seeing? What I was seeing lots of patients with insect-borne illness and malnutrition, and not to mention the traumatic injuries they'd had from the earthquake. And so I thought it was very important to start thinking about what can you do to improve nutrition and prevent insect-borne illness. And so naturally, I wound up at Bayer, in Monsanto and Bayer, in order to be able to provide the largest population with access to the tools that we have had in the West that have given us an unprecedented increase in life expectancy, health, food security, and natural abundance. So from here, I'm going to go and sort of take a historical perspective on how we got here. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. So I'm going to go to the next slide if I can. There we go. So dawn really began in Africa. It was the original Garden of Eden, where the first version of mankind was found in the fossil record, starting with a 7-million-year-old hominid named Sahelanthropus, discovered in Chad, and followed by the world-famous 3.2-million-year-old Lucy, discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia. For millennia, these early human relatives trailblazed across savannas and deserts of Africa, hunting and gathering along the way. Eventually, they settled along the great river valleys of the Fertile Crescent by the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates and the floodplains of the Nile. 10,000 years ago, they discovered that planting wheat in the Mesopotamian river basin made life more comfortable and stabilized the food supplies of these wandering groups. Agriculture spread from the east into the Egypt's Nile Delta and ultimately became the foundation for civilizations of the ancient world. With the invention of writing, information was able to be shared more widely. Despite these incredible advances, civilizations were still at the mercy of Mother Nature. For millennia, outbreaks of pandemic diseases and infestations were thought to be the work of a wrathful God delivered as punishment for the sins of mankind. People weren't aware that many diseases like malaria and typhus were actually carried by insects and rodents. People just thought of these creatures as nuisances. Around 400 BCs, the Persians discovered the insecticidal properties of the simple chrysanthemum daisy. They began to harvest these flowers and sold them to armies to combat lice and flea infestations. This was one of the greatest discoveries for mankind, as Persian powder could fight off pests, which caused misery in the ranks of the soldiers. And that was the status quo for thousands of years. Plagues and floods and famines were commonplace. Life expectancy remained stubbornly low at 30. And then a miracle occurred. Out of the ashes of alchemy came chemistry. And with this new understanding, civilized society could use Mother Nature's recipes as the template for producing the 5 most important advances in public health. The 20th century was arguably the golden age of science. At the dawn of the century, 45% of the US population farmed, and the people lived to the ripe old age of 45. By the end of by the end of the century, life expectancy had increased to close to 35 years, despite 2 world wars and great famines. So what were those advances? First, water sanitation. When Jonathan Snow correctly deduced that cholera was transmitted by contaminated water, the field of epidemiology was born, as was the idea that treating water using chemicals would reduce the fecal-oral transmission of diarrhea illnesses, saving countless lives. Add to that the discovery that using attenuated viruses or protein from viruses and bacteria could boost the immune system through vaccination and prevent diseases that were highly fatal. This was instrumental in preventing childhood illnesses and death. The discovery of antibiotics. When Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, a chemical that was secreted from a fungus that had bactericidal effects, bacterial infections that routinely killed patients were stopped in their tracks. And then food security. Scientific advances in agriculture brought us to an unprecedented level of food security. And last but not least, the control of vector-borne diseases. The discovery that flowers made pyrethrins, which are chemicals that are naturally occurring in these flowers, cause that these chemicals called sodium channel blockade in the nerves of insects, and they result in paralysis and death. And that led to the development of a synthetic version of the ancient Persian powder that was light, stable, and less allergenic. These are called pyrethroids, and pyrethroids are first-line chemicals that prevent insect-borne illnesses like malaria and the plague. Now let's address the plague. Yersinia pestis is a gram-negative coccobacillus that has profoundly shaped the history of the world. When a flea feeds on an infected rat, the bacteria multiply in its pharynx, rendering it incapable of swallowing. The hungry flea then lands on a person and has a feeding frenzy since it cannot swallow. It repeatedly regurgitates plague bacteria into its host. The subsequent infection leads to bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic plague. After inoculation, plague travels through the lymphatics and rapidly multiplies in the lymph nodes, resulting in massive lymphadenopathy. These swellings are called buboes. When the bacteria enter the bloodstream, either through the thoracic duct or by direct inoculation into the microcirculation, septicemic plague begins, triggering the complement cascade, which leads to bacterial lysis, the release of lipopolysaccharide, and results in septic shock. Infected macrophages travel to the lung, resulting in plague pneumonia, which is spread by droplets when patients begin coughing. Pneumonic plague has 100% mortality if not treated with antibiotics within 24 hours. Patients with the plague develop acral necrosis due to microthrombi in the microvasculature, and this is how it got the name Black Death. Fleas are only part of the problem. What about rats? Well, that leads us to another One Health type story. In the early 1920s, Wisconsin farmers, Wisconsin's a state in the United States, were faced with a puzzling problem. Their cattle started dying of massive hemorrhages. In February of 1933, a farmer by the name of Ed Carlson got fed up with his cattle dying without an explanation. He loaded a dead cow into his truck along with a bucket of blood that wouldn't coagulate and brought them to the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, where they discovered that a chemical, a naturally occurring chemical called coumarin in sweet clover, is converted by mold in hay, a fungal infection of hay, to dicoumarol. Dicoumarol inhibits vitamin K epoxide reductase, which in turn inhibits the gamma carboxylation of factors 2, 7, 9, and 10 in the liver, and that decreases prothrombin levels and causes anticoagulation. Warfarin was launched as a rodenticide in 1948. It turns out that rats are very particular about their feeding habits and warn other rats away from eating things that make them feel sick. Fortunately, warfarin doesn't make rats feel sick, so they eat it. 3 days later, they bump their heads have little head bleeds and die. Anybody have any idea of who else needs blood thinners? Well, it turns out that people with atrial fibrillation greatly reduce their chance of stroke with anticoagulation. It was also thought that anticoagulation would help prevent ischemic heart disease. After President Dwight Eisenhower had a myocardial infarction, he was put on warfarin to prevent worsening of his ischemic heart disease. Warfarin is still a first-line medication for the prevention of stroke, even though it started out as a rodenticide. Fortunately for us, vitamin D, the same vitamin D that you make when sunshine hits your skin, is also a rodenticide. That's right, your very own bodies make a pesticide. The same vitamin D that people are selling at extraordinarily high prices to treat COVID. Vitamin D turns out to cause hypercalcemia in rats and now has supplanted warfarin as a first-line rodenticide. So how do we prevent the plague from causing another pandemic? All it takes is a little vitamin D and some synthetic chrysanthemum dust, which are both pesticides and critical for public health. Back to the plague. Up until the 20th century, there were limited options for controlling global pandemics of bubonic plague. The predecessor for the World Health Organization established an office in Paris, specifically tasked with developing protocols to address plague outbreaks. These protocols were rudimentary and involved the 3 I's: isolation, incineration, and inoculation, although there were very few vaccines prior to the 20th century. Like with COVID, the strict implementation of these protocols resulted in significant resentment from the communities affected. Relief came with the 20th century scientific breakthroughs that led to the development of new chemistries which kept the plague at bay. This included the discovery of antibiotics, insecticides, and rodenticides. And as you can see from this map, plague is still endemic to many parts of the world. And the reason why there aren't more pandemics that require isolation is because of pest control. Plants produce their own chemicals, which have both pharmaceutical and pesticidal properties. This plant on the left is the calabar, the calabar bean. The discovery of the plant that produces a carbamate cholinesterase inhibitor, and it was discovered on the banks of the Calabar River in Nigeria. This discovery led to the development of carbamate insecticides, as well as medicines that treat neuromuscular disorders and dementia. So you can use this both for medicine and as insecticides. Overdoses of cholinesterase inhibitors are treated with atropine. That comes from the plant on the right, Datura, which is also used pharmaceutically for slow heart rates in ophthalmologic procedures. It wasn't easy getting here, so how did we manage to pull this off? Let's take a trip down memory lane to see how it happened. We made these discoveries by digging back in history and leaning on Mother Nature. Remember, plants can't run away from you, so they defend themselves by making their own natural pesticides. Once again, the daisy, the common daisy, Chrysanthemum cineifolium, produces pyrethrin, a naturally occurring insecticide that modulates sodium channels and paralyzes insects. We don't have the same kind of sodium channels, so they don't bother us. The Japanese discovered that pyrethrins were very effective at killing mosquitoes and invented the mosquito coil. We've taken pyrethrins and made them even better by using the principles of organic chemistry to make them more stable in light and less allergenic. Pyrethroids combine Mother Nature's backbone with human ingenuity to create chemistries that prevent malaria, treat lice, and control mosquitoes. At the dawn of World War II, however, there was a huge shortage of chrysanthemums and pyrethrin production was cut drastically. A desperate race was on to find an alternative because many casualties were due to malaria and other insect-borne illnesses. In fact, the leading cause of death in the military tends to be insect-borne illness rather than traumatic injuries. Dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, DDT, was first synthesized in 1884 and put on a shelf. Its insecticidal properties were discovered by Dr. Paul Mueller in 1939, which was very timely as there was a huge shortage of pyrethrin-derived insecticides and large outbreaks of insect-borne illnesses in troops. In 1948, Dr. Mueller won the Nobel Prize in the medicine for his discovery, and by 1953, DDT was credited by saving 50 million lives and averting 1 billion insect-borne illnesses. DDT was such a huge success and widely used in malaria eradication campaigns. But by the 1950s, malaria was gone in the US and Europe. DDT became widely used in agriculture as an effective pesticide because for the first time ever, farmers had a very low toxicity chemical that they could use to treat crop infection or infestations like locusts. By the early 1960s, there was increasing concern about the biopersistence of these pesticides. And Rachel Carson very rightly wrote a book describing some of the decrease in the songbird population because of the off-target effects of DDT and its building up in the food chain. And she became very concerned that this was going to alter the environment irretrievably. So the environmental movement was born after this. The Environmental Protection Agency of the United States was established on December 2nd, 1970 under President Nixon, and the first order of business for this organization was to ban DDT. There was also pressure to have a worldwide ban. However, it's still important in malaria endemic areas of the world. Rachel Carson did realize that farmers needed some kind of chemical to control pests and advocated for the use of a chemical produced by a naturally occurring bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis. BT is approved for organic industry pest control, and it has it's very targeted to crop pests. It doesn't have many off-target effects for beneficial insects. And so once again, it's approved for organic farming. Companies like Syngenta and Monsanto figured out which gene made this chemical, this protein, and put it in the plants. And now your crops don't need insecticides. And this is the beginning of the GMO story. Yet the banning of DDT didn't make the insects go away. There's still a need to control these creatures as insects and arachnoids turn out to be the #1 cause of morbidity and mortality worldwide, affecting humans and livestock. Insects also cause devastating damage to crops. For example, take the fall armyworm. It's an invasive species native to the Americas. Fall armyworm was detected in Central and Western Africa in early 2016 and further reported and confirmed in the whole mainland of Southern Africa, in Madagascar, and it's spread all the way to the Seychelles Islands. The insect is among the most destructive crop pests. These voracious invaders feed large numbers on the leaves and stems of more than 350 plant species, including staple crops such as maize, cotton, rice, and sorghum. Maize is its preferred snack, and it's an important staple for more than 1.2 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. It is by far the most important cereal crop in sub-Saharan Africa, accounting for over 30% of the population's caloric intake. More than 300 million Africans depend on maize as their main food crop. Fall armyworm's hunger for maize not only causes significant losses to farmers, but also poses a very real threat to food security. They can destroy a crop yield by over 50%, drastically impacting farmers' livelihoods. These losses hit smallholder maize farmers most directly, as the majority on average have a farm that's less than 1 hectare big. So they rely on these crops to stave off hunger and poverty. Based on 2018 projections by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the FAO, fall armyworm is responsible for the loss of up to 17.7 million tons of maize every year. That's representing enough to feed tens of millions of people, and it's an average economic loss of about $4.6 billion US. Like people, crops are also prone to insect-borne illness. For example, weeds harbor fungal pathogens, which are then transmitted by insects to crops. Fungal infections of crops produce mycotoxins like aflatoxin, which can cause outbreaks of acute liver failure and lead to the increased risk of hepatocellular carcinoma. To avoid these outbreaks, weed control, insect control, and fungal control are all important for food security. Aflatoxins are a group of related secondary metabolites produced by Aspergillus flavus and Aspergillus parasiticus. And these are found, these fungi are found normally in soil and organic material. These pathogens frequently infect corn and peanuts. The first outbreak of human aflatoxicosis was reported in 1975 and resulted in the deaths of over 100 people and dogs in India. The consumption of moldy corn led to an epidemic of sudden liver failure. Patients would present with jaundice, abdominal swelling, and rapidly die of massive gastrointestinal bleeding. Thin layer chromatography of one of the liver specimens demonstrated fluorescence under UV light. Histopathology of liver tissue under the microscope showed proliferation and scarring of the bile ducts. Aflatoxin was identified as the etiologic agent for this disease and has since become heavily regulated in food crops. There are 4 major aflatoxins, B1, B2, G1, and G2. The B designation results from the blue fluorescence of the toxin under UV light, where G fluoresces is yellow-green under UV light. Aflatoxin contamination of peanuts is especially concerning in the global south. According to the UN, 162 million children under the age of 5 had stunted growth in the mid-2014s. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia account for 90% of under 5 mortality annually. Children are at particular risk of malnutrition and around weaning. In order to prevent kwashiorkor, or protein calorie malnutrition, kids are often started on peanut butter supplements around weaning times to minimize this protein deficiency. Control of aflatoxins in the peanut supply has become a major focus of nutrition programs in the developing world. In African countries, children with kwashiorkor have been demonstrated to show high frequencies of aflatoxin B1 biomarkers. Children with kwashiorkor have very similar features to patients with chronic hepatic failure, with extremity wasting and ascites or fluid accumulation in the abdomen. Aflatoxin B1 is also thought to contribute to malabsorption syndromes in the gut, further exacerbating malnutrition. So let's move on to weeds. The water hyacinth was introduced to Rwanda in the 1980s as the fastest growing plant in the world. It has become a major invasive species on Lake Victoria. One plant the size of your hand can grow into a mat of vegetation covering 6,500 feet. Large, dense mats can grow up to 2 meters deep and choke out local plant species, decrease dissolved oxygen and nutrients in the water, and block sunlight, leading to the formation of anoxic dead zones and fish kills. Hyacinth can displace water and reduce the capacity of reservoirs by up to 400 cubic meters of water per hectare, causing water levels to fall rapidly in dry periods. The surface water also becomes fertile breeding ground for mosquitoes, which can spread viruses and malaria. And there have been reports of water hyacinths blocking supply intakes for hydroelectric plants and cutting off electricity for entire cities. We've talked about Datura a little bit. It's another invasive plant that's spreading across sub-Saharan Africa, and there are multiple reports of Datura contamination causing outbreaks of an agitated delirium that lasts for days, where patients strip naked with hallucinations, and they can have seizures and die of heat stroke. In 2019, there was an outbreak of poisoning in the West Indies when people consumed organic flour contaminated with Datura, and 35 people went to the hospital with this syndrome. As you can see, pesticides are critical for food security and public health. Many of the active ingredients also have pharmaceutical efficacy. Western nations forget how important they are for preventing infectious diseases of crops, humans, and animals. So let's go over some technical stuff. So what is a pesticide? It's an umbrella term for multiple different categories of chemicals. So herbicides kill weeds and invasive plants like kudzu and hyacinth. Insecticides control bugs, ticks, mosquitoes, fleas, lice, bed bugs, the tsetse fly. Antibiotics, if you think about it, soil organisms have been evolved to compete with each other, and they make chemicals, naturally occurring chemicals, to control other ones. So antibiotics kill bacteria like strep, staph, typhus, and the plague. Antivirals kill HIV and hepatitis C. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Whoops. And fungicides for people kill nuisance infections like athlete's foot or things like that. But they also, in crops, actually put a huge swath of the population at risk because of the mycotoxin production. There are most of the pesticides that we are exposed to are from Mother Nature. 99% of the pesticides consumed are chemicals that are produced by plants to defend themselves. Remember, plants can't run away from you, so they need to make their own pesticides. These are lectins, tannins, and cyanogens, and we're going to talk about cyanogens in a minute. When stressed or damaged, these greatly increase their natural pesticide levels. This is an old study by Bruce Ames, but in 1990, when he did the study, only 52 of these natural pesticides were tested, and 27 of them were rodent carcinogens. These are commonly found thousands of times higher than any synthetic pesticide residue on a crop. And remember, these are the chemicals that plants are making themselves. Americans eat about 1.5 grams of these natural pesticides every day, and that's over 10,000 times higher than any synthetic residue that's been sprayed on a crop. Vegans likely eat more. This is a classic example of a plant that produces its own pesticides. So cassava is a tuberous root that is resistant to drought, disease, and pests, and it's a major source of carbohydrates in tropical areas. It's the second most important consumed food in Uganda after bananas, and it's a staple for over 50% of the population. However, if it's not properly prepared, it can cause big outbreaks of cyanide poisoning. In September of 2017, there were 33 people who got very, very sick in Uganda after consuming improperly prepared cassava at a funeral. And so you can get cyanide poisoning if you don't fix this, if you don't prepare it correctly. And this was reported in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report in 2019. So let's get back to managing plagues. Oh, sorry, no, let's talk about the necessity of crop protection. These are just a couple more technical slides. So as you can see, protection of crops in horticulture and forestry needs to be conducted to protect them against insects, mites, ascarids, and nematodes, because they can do huge damage to crops, which decrease yields and threaten food security. Plant diseases like fungi and sometimes bacteria and viruses can really cause harm as well. Fungi can make aflatoxin, and mycotoxins can poison people and livestock. And once again, weeds growing into crops and restricting the growth of crops also can be toxic. You can have huge yield losses if you don't use herbicides. Now, if you think about the amount of land we have to feed people, and the apple is the earth, there's a tiny, tiny bit of arable land to feed people. And why is that a problem? Well, that's because the population is growing significantly. In 2000, there were 6.7 billion people in the world population. By year 2025, there's supposed to be 8, and by 2050, there's supposed to be 10. And so you've got a total potential of 13 billion hectares on Earth. 4.3 billion of those are deserts, glaciers, and mountains. You can't grow on that. 3.8 billion are forest and steppe. You don't want to cut down all of your forests. 3.4 billion are grassland and prairie. It's difficult to grow crops on grassland and prairie. You can have livestock there. And 1.5 billion is arable land. Now, if you don't have crop protection, you need much more land to grow enough food for the world's population. If you have crop protection, you can reduce the need for that land. So once again, this really sort of talks about how the amount of food needed over the next 20 to 25 years is twice the amount produced over the past 10,000 years. So how are plant protection products developed? So in the past, the first attempts, everybody started to try to use fire to treat crop infections. Now, the problem with fire is it's a little bit hard to control. And so people would often lose crops like that. You could have superstition and say some prayers and then kind of appeal to the gods to have your crops be successful. Fast forward to the 1800s, people started using other things. So salt, iron, vitriol. In 1913, people started using methyl mercury. And then in the 1930s, dithiocarbamates were produced. And DDT, as we talked about, came about in 1939. In 1942, 2,4-D was developed, and as a herbicide, and organophosphates were discovered to be insecticides. And in the 1970s, glyphosate was developed. So when you want to put a pesticide on the market, you are required by law to do a battery of tests. Those tests are done under what we call GLP, good laboratory practice. Good laboratory practice requires that the tests be reproducible. You hear all the time in medical journals that a lot of research is not reproducible. You have to have reproducible tests. They are audited. They can be audited by the regulatory agencies around the world. It takes about 10 years and $250 million to run all of these tests. And if the regulatory agencies at any point in time say that you've done these tests wrong, they can stop the production of that chemical, or they can prevent it from coming on the market. Not only are they auditable, but every adverse effect requires reporting. So you have to, in the United States, for example, if a mouse gets wobbly, you have to report that to the EPA. If a mouse dies, you have to report that to the EPA. So these are all required tests that are reproducible, auditable, and required before you can do any of these things and put anything on the market. So that's for just the active ingredients. So those are the active chemicals that do have the pesticidal properties. Then for registration, also, you have to have the formulated products. So for example, with glyphosate, which is a herbicide, which we can talk in more detail about later, glyphosate is the active ingredient. There's only a small amount of glyphosate in the bottle. What else is in the bottle is a surfactant, which is like a detergent. So that the chemical can get into the leaves of the plant because the leaves are coated in a waxy cuticle, and it's hard for a water-soluble product to get under there. So the surfactant actually helps with that. Then there's a lot of water in the bottle. There's some food coloring and sometimes an anti-foaming agent, kind of like simethicone, the kind of simethicone that we take for gastrointestinal gas. So these studies for the formulated products require toxicity tests, oral, dermal, and inhalational tests. They look at skin and eye irritation. They look at sensitization to make sure it doesn't have an allergenic effect. And they make sure that it doesn't get taken up through the skin. And once you've got this all registered, that will be what you need. That will determine what you need to use as PPE and a whole variety of interventions to prevent human exposure to pesticides. So there is a lot of innovation going on in R&D, in research and development, to make crop protection products safer for humans and mammals. We're really working on decreasing the toxicity by searching for and developing less toxic active ingredients. And like I said before, we often use Mother Nature as the backbone and then tweak it a little to make a low toxicity, very effective pesticide. We also increase targeting to non-mammalian targets, just to insects. And we can tweak those targeting so it doesn't bother off-target beneficial insects. So here I'm just going to go through briefly some of the kinds of things that people use that are out there. So ketoenols distort insect lipid biosynthesis, so they can't make fats at the larva stage. Then there are juvenile insect hormone mimics, so methoprene. That distorts insect ovarian development, and has a higher mortality in adults that are treated as pupae. And then chitin synthesis. We don't have chitin. We've got bones. We don't have chitin. Chitin synthesis inhibitors like triflumion are insect specific. Mammals do not synthesize chitin, so it doesn't really bother us. The new insecticides have very low mammalian toxicity, which is one of the major goals of pesticide development. There are also active ingredients that target receptors that are not in humans or different in humans. So insect ryanodine receptors, which involve calcium effluxes and influxes into cells, go to insect-specific subtype. There are no effects on mammalian subtypes 1 through 3. And then nicotinic receptors. We have nicotinic receptors at our neuromuscular junctions and in our brains, but this nicotinic receptor is very different than the alpha-4 beta-2 nicotinic receptors in insect-specific subtypes. So these neonicotinoids don't tend to bother us. Herbicide selectivity, it also uses mechanisms and enzymes that are not present in human. For example, tubulin selective, EPSP, is the enzymatic pathway that glyphosate affects. It blocks that, so plants can't make aromatic amino acids and can't make their own proteins. Acetolactate synthase, photosynthesis 2, fatty acid elongase, and auxin receptors are all examples of herbicidal mechanisms. And once again, we will get more into this as we go along in the talks. So herbicide have selected targets. They can select hormones. They can select for microtubuli. They can select for the chloroplast, or they can select for the cell membrane and cell wall. So these are the way these work, and we'll get into more detail going forward. So fungicide selectivity is also designed to reduce toxicity in humans. Humans use a lot of azoles. There is some use for azoles in agriculture, but there are a lot more active ingredients that act on receptors that are not in humans. So much faster metabolism and things like that. So a pesticide formulation is a mixture of chemicals which effectively controls a pest. Formulating a pesticide involves processing it to improve its storage, handling, safety, application, or effectiveness. They have the active ingredients, they have the solvents, they have carriers, they have adjuvants, which is like that surfactant that we talked about, the detergent, and they have preservatives often. Crop protection products are most commonly mixed in water and sprayed. A lot of active ingredients, however, are not water soluble. So different technologies are used to formulate the active ingredient into a product with optimal application properties. And the goal is to make them safe and convenient to use, have the type of application and specifics of the active ingredient. You want to have storage stability, and you want to deliver the required dose to the correct site of action. You have to have reliable mixing and application of the product under various climatic conditions. Go to the next slide. These are formulation types. You can have emulsifiable concentrates, suspension concentrates, and oil dispersion. These all have a variety of different benefits. So you can have simple manufacturing with emulsifiable concentrates, high biologic activity, good chemical stability. With suspension concentrates, they're safe and convenient. They tend to be water-based. They have no dust and no flammable liquids. And then for the oil dispersion, oil acts as an adjuvant, and it helps with penetration and spray retention and enhancement. Often no preservatives are needed. You have wettable powders and water dispensable granules. The benefits of these are uniform active ingredient distribution and very good residual control and reduced dermal hazard, but you do have some dust. The benefits of water dispensable granules means that there's no dust, you get reduced inhalation risk, and a high load of active ingredient in granules as possible. There are multiple other formulation types. For example, dust, granules, microemulsion, capsule suspension, soluble liquid, concentrate, soluble powder, aerosol spray, and baits. In most formulations, active ingredients are in relatively low concentrations, and from a toxicology point of view, other formulation ingredients can be more important. In older chemistry, solvents can be xylene, kerosene, and acetone. Solvent effects can cause nausea and vomiting, dizziness, somnolence, coma, sensitization against catecholamines. You can have sudden cardiac arrest if you wind up inhaling halogenated organic chlorines. These can dominate the signs and symptoms of an overdose. Surfactants, on the other hand, if you ingest it, may have effects on cell membranes, and they can be found in a multitude of products like paints, inks, shampoos, toothpaste, and detergents and toilet bowl cleaners. They are all over the place, surfactants are. So let's get back to managing plagues. Were these in fact curses from God, or is there a scientific explanation for these plagues? The plague of water turning into blood. We now know that red tide is caused by an overabundance of microorganisms called dinoflagellates, not blood. We know that red tides are produced by Carina brevis, an algae that produces brevetoxin, which is aerosolized in bubbles and concentrates in shellfish. This not only causes large fish kills, but people who eat contaminated shellfish develop neurotoxic shellfish poisoning. Brevetoxin activates sodium channels, causing peripheral nerve depolarization, paresthesias and ataxia, as well as nausea and vomiting. The use of fertilizer does impact some types of red tide. What if we found a gene in corn that would make it possible for plants to fix their own nitrogen and put it in the corn? What if we didn't need fertilizer? By the way, that gene does exist. Recently in Mexico, researchers discovered a variety of corn growing at a much higher altitude than was expected. They found that the roots of the plant were covered in a thick gel that provided a rich source of nitrogen to the plants. Now imagine putting that gene in another plant so we could reduce the need for nitrogen for fertilizers. How about a plague of amphibians? The cane toad was introduced to Australia as an all-natural solution for controlling cane beetles eating the sugarcane crop. It turns out that the toads were too fat to jump high enough to eat the beetles, and because of their inherent toxicity, they produce cardiac glycosides in their parotid glands. Their natural predators have cardiac arrests after eating them. So they've proliferated wildly and have become an invasive species with devastating impacts on native wildlife. We use the cardiac glycoside digoxin as a pharmaceutical in the treatment of heart failure. Cardiac glycosides block sodium potassium ATPase, which directly inhibits the efflux of calcium from cardiac myocytes, leading to an improvement in contractility and symptomatic relief in heart failure. Obviously, the dose makes the poison, so it's generally inadvisable to eat toads to treat heart failure. The plague of gnats, lice, and flies. The mosquito is the #1 killer of man worldwide. Add flies, fleas, ticks, and mites. These turn out to really be a leading cause of morbidity and mortality affecting humans and livestock. Once again, we use pyrethroids and other insecticides to decrease the impacts of these creatures on public health. What about plagues of livestock? Insect-borne illness can devastate livestock too. One of the reasons why the Serengeti Game Park is sparsely populated is because it's a hotbed of sleeping sickness, which is carried by the tsetse fly. Outbreaks of infectious diseases like anthrax and bovine TB are also transmissible to human beings. Antibiotics use is frowned on in livestock, but it's critical for preventing zoonotic diseases in humans. The plague of pustules. Vaccines are responsible for the eradication of smallpox worldwide. We became very close to eradicating measles until the Wakefield article was published in The Lancet. Unfortunately, it wasn't retracted for 12 years and launched the anti-vaccine movement. And since COVID, the fallout has been enormous. The plague of hail and fire. Thunderstorms bring hail and lightning, which set off vast wildfires and have a huge impact on air quality. Wildfire has led to an incredible loss of life and property across the west coast of the United States, Hawaii, Australia, Portugal, and Spain. One of the major ways of preventing forest fires is by managing invasive weeds like Arundodonax and clearing underbrush. Again, we have the tools to do this, but because of misinformation, people are reluctant to use them or call for outright bans. A plague of locusts. Locusts ravaged East Africa 2 years ago. The desert locust is the most aggressive crop pest on Earth. In one day, a small swarm can eat the same amount of food that can feed 35,000 people for a year. This swarm swept up through Kenya, Somalia, across the Gulf of Aden, into Yemen, up through Saudi Arabia, into Iran, Pakistan, and India, devastating crops along the way. Unfortunately, Kenya only has 5 crop dusters for controlling this infestation. Just recently, a plague of locusts descended into South Africa and stripped 5 million hectares, that's 49,000 square kilometers of grazing land. As you can see, insect control is critical for preventing famine. A plague of darkness. We are witnessing a re-emergence of the Dark Ages in terms of scientific thinking that could have a profound impact upon us and our future generations. As we said before, there are 5 public health advances of the 20th century that brought us an unprecedented 30-year increase in life expectancy: water sanitation, antibiotics, vaccines, vector control, and food security. In this 21st century, we are witnessing the dismantling of these advances. Activists promote the consumption of raw water to reconstitute the microbiome. That's how cholera spread. The Lancet launched the anti-vaccine movement, which was made worse with the COVID pandemic. Vaccines and antibiotics work and have delivered an unprecedented improvement in human and veterinary health. The campaign against pesticides is fraught with misinformation. Vector control is a cornerstone for preventing insect-borne illness, a leading cause of death for world and the people. It's also critical for managing invasive species, which crowd out indigenous plants and animals, demolishing habitat and biodiversity. Last but not least, we have 10,000 years of experience with organic farming, and nothing's wrong with organic farming, but we only have 50 years of food security in the West. And that's because of scientific advances in agriculture. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization. Without it, you and I would not be sitting here. While there's nothing wrong with organic farming, it cannot feed 10 billion people without taking over every inch of habitat left in the world. We have the technology to protect biodiversity and feed our growing population. There are just a few more slides in this talk. For the last few slides, let's talk about the impact that one man can have on the world. The man on the left is Nikolai Vavilov. Vavilov was a Soviet plant geneticist and one of the fathers of modern plant breeding. We still use his science in agriculture today. He had the idea for setting up a seed bank to protect heritage seeds and biodiversity. The man on the right is Trofim Lysenko, arguably the deadliest scientist of the 20th century. He did not believe in genetics. He fabricated his research and became Stalin's Minister of Agriculture. He was the architect of the Great Famine in Ukraine during the 1930s, known as the Holodomor. His ideas were adopted by Mao during the Great Leap Forward in China. These agricultural policies led to famine, where over 50 million people starved to death. Vavilov openly disagreed with Lysenko's ideas, and because of his attempt to defend science, he was sent to the Gulag. While there, he tried to teach other prisoners how to grow the best crops that they could, despite their terrible circumstances. Tragically, Vavilov starved to death. And much too late, he was ultimately recognized for his scientific discoveries after Stalin died. This man, on the other hand, grew up as a subsistence farmer in Iowa. He is responsible for making discoveries in plant breeding that fed 1 billion people. His name is Norman Borlaug. He won a Nobel Prize for his work. He is the reason why the prediction that the human population was going to outstrip the food supply didn't come true. His scientific advances drove the Green Revolution and improved worldwide food security. Isn't it amazing what an impact one man can have on the world? The scientific advances of the 20th century were absolutely unprecedented. Again, in 1900, 45% of the population farmed in the US, and the average life expectancy was 45. By 2000, 2% of the population farmed, and we gained almost a 35-year increase in life expectancy, despite 2 world wars and several mass famines. Once again, we know the public health impacts of those 5 advances in public health. Unfortunately, we're at the crossroads of superstition in science, in agriculture, and medicine. Believe it or not, there's common ground. And that common ground is pursuit of the truth. Science is the tool that can shine light on reality, regardless of ideology. So I have a challenge for you. Be a beacon of light in the face of the dark. Tell the truth. This is our Garden of Eden, and your job is to keep it alive for our children. Asante.
Wow, that was amazing. And please just go back to project that slide that you had.
Yep.
Yes, the one with the toll-free number. But thank you so much, Dr. Lockwood. That was very good overview introduction of what the series of talks we are going to be having this for a month-long talks for the next 4 sessions. So I really want to thank you for that. And I can see the reactions are quite lovely. And that was a very nice way to introduce us to the topic. And I hope there have been a lot of insights. So as I give you a moment to just go through the charts, there's one other number that we need to be able to project there. That's the poison information line. When we did this series, when I started this series sometime back, we had not set up the poison information. We had the poison information center, but not as widely known. And now we have the numbers that you can reach us, the 0800 720 021 in the event somebody has a poisoning case. So I just want to give you a moment as you look through just the questions. I would like to request, as you look through them and assimilate, I'd want to give a minute to Vinay Sharma. There are some he has been answering. You could just give an overview of some of the questions that have come in the Q&A as we give Dr. Lockwood a chance to just catch her breath and internalize the questions. Thank you. Vinay?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. I mean, I can see some of the, can you hear me first of all? Perfect.
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. I mean, I'm receiving some of the questions, so I'm just summarizing what has been asked so far. So, I mean, there are many questions around the consumer safety, which means if we are, as a consumers, we are consuming the products which are sprayed by agrochemicals, how safe these are, and how companies or even producers make sure these are safe for the end consumers, because fruits and vegetables, all or maybe other things we feed ourselves and also to our children. Just to give you one crisp answer. So basically in a market nowadays, if you see most of the products, they have gone through so many screenings every time. Yeah, so within buyer, and also if I'm not uh, um, sure about the generics, but at least on all the multinational companies, they have their own standards of bringing these products into the market, and they go through several screenings, yeah, to make sure the products they are safe to the human who are spraying it, also to the consumers who are consuming it, and also to the environment. Yeah, but still, as someone said, if we use these products as per label instructions, they work very well. But sometimes because of irresponsible use, I can say, or because of unintentional use, the quantities can be higher. So in that case, also we mentioned PHI, pre-harvest interval, on the labels, which means after spraying this product, how many days they have to not to allow anyone to consume this product. Or you can say you can harvest this crop after, so like most of the cases, this is 14 days, sometimes it is 15 or 16 days as well, which is called PHI, which we make sure through our trainings to spread this knowledge around farmers so that the consumers are safe. There are many big companies, big players who are producing or who are making sure the fruits and vegetables and other produce is available in the supermarket. So they have their own stringent processes in place. So there are multiple ways when we make sure all the products which are sprayed with agrochemicals, they are safe to the consumers. On top of that, the produce which is actually getting produced here on the farm is not directly going to the consumer next day. Sometimes it's the case in some of the suburbs or some of the cities where there is a production of agriculture produce. However, in most of the cases, it goes through a transport system, which also takes 1 week and so on. So which adds to the pre-harvest interval. So in general, it should not be a problem. But there can be, we cannot take it for granted. And for that sake, the final thing is, if consumers are taking or consuming the produce, they should wash it properly and only then they consume it. So I think if we see entire process, it's not like pesticides or the agrochemicals, they are going to harm all the consumers. So the chances are really low, but still there are some. If we take care of all these things, I mean, there should not be any problem.
Thank you very much for summarizing that, Vinay. I know there'll be those who probably had similar questions and they may not have seen the chat. So I'm hoping Dr. Lockwood has got her breath and she can be able to, just looking at the questions, if you can just give an overview of your responses.
Can you all hear me okay? The first one is from Dr. Onyango. Hi, all. Is there a program that makes people enlightened about the dangers of these chemicals that we consume from farm products? Yeah, that's one of the important parts of this program. So the goal of the Safe Use Ambassadors program is to enlighten you as to why we use these chemicals and why they're important for public health and food security. But they're also important. The following sessions, we will be giving you more insight into how some of these work, what safety precautions you need to take, what to do in case of exposure, and things like, and the treatments that you need to be able to provide people. So we will teach you how to recognize some of these different kinds of exposures. There are different classes of chemicals that can cause what we call a toxidrome. And the toxidrome is pretty recognizable without even having to look at the actual name of the chemical. You can tell from the bedside sometimes what somebody's got. And so we can talk about how to recognize those kinds of things. So why was the hyacinth introduced into Rwanda in 1980? That is a really good question. I'm not sure why. I know it was introduced as a ornamental plant in the United States, and that's how we wound up with a big, huge infestation. And in California, it's a huge problem for water reservoirs. So let's see. So I suspect that it was introduced to Rwanda for decorative purposes because it's a pretty plant, but people had no idea how invasive it was. So trying to explain religion with scientific research. Why did the water stored earlier in Egyptians' houses turn into blood? That's a good question. It's probably some kind of fungal infection that did that. That's a very good question. I don't know. Muidi Makathimo. Oh, thank you. It just said thank you. Let's see. Victor Moody, given the limited arable land per capita in Kenya, how can we balance the need for effective pest control in agriculture with the risks of pesticide toxicity to ensure sustainable food production and protect public health? What are the best practices in pesticide toxicology and poison management that could be implemented to safeguard this scarce resource? That is a fantastic set of questions. We really have, the label is the law. So if you follow the label on the pesticide, just like if you follow the label on a pharmaceutical, you won't get hurt. And so that's what we're aiming to do with this Safe Use Ambassadors program, we're trying to get the agricultural sector and smallholder farmers together with the medical sector so everybody knows what to do. And so we will be answering these questions coming up in further in the next set of lectures. And so I hope that we can fulfill those answers, answer those questions for you, because it's a really important question. Let's see. Let me look. Open 3.
So as you're looking at those, I've seen a question regarding why do we about the use of people committing
suicide. Yes, suicide
Wow.
is a terrible thing, and we really are working on developing a mental health program for farmers. I'm actually working on a paper right now about farmer mental health in order to prevent suicide. We take it very, very seriously, and what we want to do is figure out ways that we've got stewardship programs that help with storage, that decrease access for kids. That's all part of our stewardship model, but we're also trying to find what the social determinants of farmer mental health are to prevent farmer suicide. And one of the things that often really impacts farmers that we've found in our research is that the loss of a crop leads to incredible food insecurity for that farmer and his or her family. And that can cause a lot of mental stress. So crop loss, the financial impacts of that, the food security impacts of that can contribute to really poor outcomes in farmer mental health. So we're trying to figure out what the social determinants of farmer mental health are to build some resilience in and prevent suicide. The prevention is really, really important.
Thank you. As you read through Guy Bo's comment, we've been operating the Poison Information toll-free service for quite a while. And when we look at our statistics of the calls, we actually have most of the calls are coming from accidental and not incidental, that people are using the pesticides. But when you think about it, mental health would be what you need to address, because somebody wants to end their life, will end it with whatever means they have,
That's
whether
right.
they decide to hang themselves. So we cannot say it is it's because pesticides are in the market, that's why there's suicide. So it's really good to focus on mental health. I hope you've been able to read Guy's question so that you can be able to summarize.
Yes, there are bigger threats that may not be, okay, there's a great threat of okay, I'll read it. The bigger threat to human survival today may not be famines, epidemics, or pandemics. There's a great threat of depopulation, diminished fertility, and the degenerative so-called life diseases. So yes, this is interesting. These threats are new. New threats are blamed on the new chemicals like pesticides and other molecules alien to nature and evolution. The allegations may be erroneous, but they could carry a lot of truth and evidence in the human mortality seem to back it up. What's your opinion on this? I think this is a fantastic question, and I get this question a lot. So the reason why we're seeing an epidemic in non-communicable diseases, so heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity, cancer, is because these are diseases of aging. We're mortal, and we're going to die of something. And I think that those diseases need to be researched, and I think they need to be prevented. I think that we need to do as much research as we can. But because the reason why we're seeing those is because people are living past the age of 5 when it comes to child mortality, and 25 and 30. And you saw in the 1800s, the average lifespan in 1800 was 30 years. Because of these 5 public health advances, we now have tacked on an increased life expectancy that's unprecedented. And so it's not, I'm not surprised that we're seeing these diseases, right? But it's not because of chemicals per se. It's because of the natural sort of things that happen with aging. Now, there are some chemicals that are associated with some outcomes, and we can talk about those. You know, like benzene exposure can cause leukemia. But the vast majority of chemicals that are on the market are specifically researched to make sure that they're not going to have public health impacts. And so I like to think of this way. A lot of physicians, I love my colleagues that are physicians, but a lot of physicians are asking that particular question and then calling for bans on really important advances in crop protection because they are making that association. I like to kind of turn it the other way around and say, what if ag experts from the Food and Agriculture Organization, scientists, went to the World Health Organization and said, we don't like antihypertensive medicines. They have side effects. When people take them in overdose, they get very sick and die. We think that they should be banned because we can't feel our hypertension. Our hypertension doesn't bother us. Why are we taking these medicines, right? Doctors would look at them and say, well, that's kind of crazy because if you are not taking your antihypertensive medicines, you're going to have strokes and heart attacks and all these other outcomes, right? We shouldn't ban those. And why do we know that? Well, because we've studied this particular disease for years and years and years. Unfortunately, the agricultural sector does not have a voice. So doctors would say that's crazy to do this. To go back to organic farming, once again, nothing's wrong with organic farming. You can do it. It just doesn't reliably feed people. And there are multiple famines that have resulted when you just use organic farming. So we can't possibly feed 10 billion people with organic farming alone. Or organic farming, they've estimated, can maybe feed 4 billion people if you're using up every scrap of available land. And then which 6 billion are going to volunteer to decide not to eat? I don't think that that's a decision that we should be making.
Thank you. So as I give you a moment to catch your breath, I'll ask you to check. There's the questions from Nyagudi, which to some extent we can respond. We have a challenge with the way people store pesticides within the homes, and at least we are appreciating that together with the AAK Grow, the agrochemical, what was previously called the Agrochemical Association of Kenya, there's going to be a month-long campaign to educate the public on just safe use, safe storage, and other challenges that can be addressed, mitigation measures, so that now we don't have accidental ingestion or exposure to pesticides or crop protection products. There is a question, I'm not too sure whether it will be the Bayer Group, but there was an initiative that had begun with Agrochemical, now AAK, to produce a pesticide poisoning manual for Kenya. Be very excited if Bayer can also partner with us to be able to get that completed. I hope you can be able, or Vinay, you're ready to, so as we give Dr. Lockwood a moment to just look through the questions, can be able to answer regarding storage. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the rural areas, if I am talking about low to middle income countries, not only in Africa, but also in Asia Pacific, in specific South Asia and Southeast Asia, there is a tendency of storing these agrochemicals bottles in the households because of various reasons. And not only this, but we have also seen in many cases, these empty containers, they are being used for various other purposes in the household activities. We, as a company, we have our own programs, but together with the industry associations, for that example, CropLife Africa, CropLife Asia, CropLife International, we are running various programs in order to raise awareness among growers. I also remember we had a program in some part of Asia and also in, don't know exactly which country in Africa, where we have provided a kind of boxes with a lock so that they can lock these boxes, and the keys were lying with the ladies of the house. And why? Because you never know, these farmers, or because of XYZ frustrations, when they are drunk, the tendency, as you said, to making suicidal attempts is more when you are drunk, when you are not in your conscious mind. So if the keys are lying with the lady, then the chances are less like this guy will be taking this as for the suicidal attempt. But yes, looking forward for such collaborations. For that, I will then definitely suggest my colleagues in Kenya. So Susan Chipkomoi is the one who is responsible for stewardship activities, and she will be then contacting with the organization in order to make sure we don't have these kind of cases, and we can at least keep on running the good programs which were there in past.
So thank you. I hope, Dr. Lockwood, you managed to catch your breath and can respond to the question
Yes.
from Liliana on
Yes, and
if
Mary,
this discourages
yeah.
cancer.
So, Liliana, we have it says, the question says, we have a facility near 2 firms using chemicals, and patients come in with history of miscarriages and cancer, advised. I unfortunately don't know what chemicals they're using. Often people, when they're looking and investigating cancers with a toxicologic origin, if you suspect that something is associated with a cancer, you're going to see the same kind of cancer. You're not going to see multiple different kinds of cancer. So you're going to see the same kind of cancer over and over and over again. So if you see cancer from multiple different sites, that's not so much associated with a chemical. And remember, viruses like Epstein-Barr virus and insect-borne things can cause all sorts of diseases as well. So viruses like EBV can cause Burkitt's lymphoma, which you see in kids a lot. And we figured that out because we could figure the viral thing out. The reason why people figured out that tobacco smoke caused lung cancer was because before the 1900s, in the United States, lung cancer was vanishingly rare, and doctors at medical schools, doctors would take medical students to see lung cancer patients because it was so vanishingly rare. They would say, this is the one time in your life you're ever going to see this. You might as well see it now, right? But by the early 20s, when people were smoking more and more, people's lung cancer started increasing, and it's a specific kind of cancer. It's squamous cell carcinoma of the lung. And then they finally started putting two together, that this exposure was causing this cancer. And you had the epidemiologic evidence, which is it gives you the hypothesis that you generate. So we are seeing this association. Is this association real? Then you need to use a set of criteria called the Bradford-Hill criteria to see if there's actually biologic plausibility, if there is a true causal association. So lots of people read epidemiology and see these patterns in epidemiology, but the epidemiology isn't necessarily backed up with a causal thing. And so that becomes hard to tease out. And we can talk more about that in more detail in some of the subsequent lectures. I think we're seeing an epidemiological transition of the communicable diseases from the elderly to the younger ages too. I think that actually you're probably seeing more kids who have increased life expectancy. And with that, with an increased population, you're going to have an increased incidence of different diseases. So just as the population grows, you're going to see more. And especially with people living longer, you're going to see an increased incidence of certain diseases as well. And there's a lot of buzz on the herbicides that M is offering in Kenya. I'm not sure I understand that question. My quiz is about CPD points. Okay. Non-communicable diseases. Oh, okay, Nimrod. To add to Vinay, we have disposal centers established by AAK. We also will need to create awareness around these. We can share the centers. Bayer East Africa is also establishing its collection centers around our centers of excellence. I hope I answered everybody's questions. I'm happy to answer more.
Thank you. So yes, and I'm glad Nimrod has mentioned that there are disposal centers, because we find that improper disposal puts people at risk of either accidental ingestion or even those who are looking for reusing containers, probably to repackage. So I'm glad AK has taken that up, and I had mentioned earlier, there is going to be a month-long campaign to increase awareness on good pesticide stewardship, and also the mitigation measures that are in place, such as having the poison information center should somebody get accidentally exposed. So thank you so much, Dr. Lockwood. I don't know whether there are other questions, but if there are, I'm sure we can capture them in next Tuesday and see what else additional. But this has been quite an exciting lecture, and I'm hoping that we will still keep the interest, and those who have attended today, tell a friend, and you can be able to join us. I hope we manage to capture everyone's questions so that I can give an opportunity to the crop science team with the Kenya, Jayesh and Susan, to give just one word or give a closing remark as we wind up. I don't know whether there are any other questions. You have Jayesh?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Dorothy. It's been a fantastic session, Eliza. The last I recorded was 968 participants. I'm sure a lot of information has gone through everyone. It's good that you are giving this to us in piecemeal every week. It will take us some time to digest all this. And from my perspective, I think this is the ideal platform where us as healthcare professionals can come and work together and partner with our farmers, with our toxicology specialists, right? This is information that we don't easily get every day. And I am personally looking forward to the next 3 sessions as we take a deeper dive and we see what is it that I, as a doctor, I, as a nurse, I, as a pharmacist, can take back in my practice as an easy to remember guide. Thank you so much, and thank you, KNH, Dorothy, and team for hosting us.
Okay, you're most welcome. Now, I think I'd hand the meeting back to the research department. We would really appreciate if we could be able to project the toll-free number so that in case of anybody who needs to make an inquiry regarding specifically poison information, you can be able to reach us on those lines. Those lines are also on every pesticide product that is marketed in the country. And that is how a number of farmers or a number of members of the public have been able to reach us in the event of accidental poisoning or even the few cases of incidental poisoning. So I don't know if that is able to
I would
project.
just like to thank everybody for the opportunity to present. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Daktari, and we look forward, say karibu again and again. We look forward to the session next Tuesday. So I'll hand to the research and programs team. And for CPD, I believe the communication went out. Well, a number of times there's delay in sending them because not as many people subscribe to the event as the ones who need the points. So we cannot generate enough tokens. So we encourage you to subscribe when you see the event on the portal so that we can be able to generate the tokens in a timely manner. So if I give Nelson. Nelson Omwenda of the research team, if we could either project that or the next session, we thank all those who have joined us today. Okay, so as they prepare, I'm sure the session was to end at 3:30, which is first time. I just want to thank you for your attention, and we look forward to interacting again next week when we have part 2. Thank you and good afternoon.